My name's Jolene Balfour. I'm the Vice President Academic and Provost here at Thompson Rivers University. I've recently landed here with my family from Ontario, and it's been a wonderful adventure. I'm very happy to be here, and it's nights like this that make it all that more worthwhile. This is one of these events where you get to sit back and listen to some amazing scholarship and research and get to really understand the importance of this university and what it brings to our community. So we have a number of people here with us this evening to work with us through the impressive scholarship of our most recent recipient of the Inaugural Professor Lectureship Series for this evening, Dr. Bruce Martin, but we'll get to him in a minute. We have some other folks here with us this evening from the Ghilardi School of Business. Dr. Ihsan Latif is with us, who is currently the acting dean of the Ghilardi School of Business and Economics, and he is going to introduce us this evening to our esteemed guest. So I'll let you.
Thank you, Julian, and welcome all our guests. I feel honored here today to celebrate Professor Bruce Martin. Dr. Martin joined TRU in 2018 as Associate Professor in the Department of Human Enterprise and Innovation, and he became full professor in 2022. So his research focus, if I say broadly, in three areas: entrepreneurship for disadvantaged people, social enterprise creation, design and scaling, entrepreneurship, education, motivation and development. But to me, Dr. Bruce Martin's research has a very innovative research agenda, and his research has the potential to make meaningful impact to our society and our community. Dr. Martin published papers in top-tier journals in his discipline, and he also presented in the top academic conferences. And I must say that Dr. Martin is not only an excellent researcher, but he is an outstanding teacher. During his relatively short period of stay in TRU, he supervised many graduate students, including from MBA, MISIM, and his MEd program. And in his service area, Dr. Martin actually chaired our Bob Ghilardi School of Business Economics undergraduate curriculum committee for 2 years. And he also led the school's research task force, research practice task force. In international area, Dr. Martin has active involvement in academic management. This is the preeminent professional association for management and organizational scholars. In today's lecture, Professor Martin will talk about his latest collaborative research on social enterprise. And the social enterprise is a fast growing organizational type, and it has the potential to transform the meaning of the business. What we mean today that it is for maximizing shareholders' profit. It may change it to create value for society as a whole. So please help me or join me to welcome Professor Bruce Martin for this, to deliver this TRU's Inaugural Professorial Lecture. His presentation title is Why Every Business Should Be Social Enterprise, Bringing Business Back to Society. Professor Martin.
Hi. I just wanted to say before we get started on our journey this evening that we wanted to make sure we recognize whose unceded territories we stand on. We're here this evening to honor to Kamloops Pisawetmik as our first house, who are the hosts here of TRU campus, and of course Tehulk is our second house of Williams Lake, who are our hosts also. So we stand here in honor of their work and their ancestral lands, and of course we serve the students and the peoples of many nations of these territories. So with no further ado, we had to do that, right? It's all you now. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Julie. Your turn. Okay, thank you very much. I really am pleased to have the opportunity to share with you my ideas and our research, because all of my research is collaborative research, in the area of social enterprise. It's something that's near and dear to my heart. And I'm also really honored to be able to do that in the context of the Inaugural Professorial Lecture. I'm pleased that I almost got those words out properly as well. So it augurs well. What we're going to do over the next 40 minutes or so is first of all understand what exactly is a social enterprise, because talking about this new organization type without having a kind of common grounding about what it is wouldn't be all that helpful to people. And then once we've done that, we're going to talk about more controversial issues. Can this new type of organization, social enterprise, replace traditional for-profit business? And then to the extent that we kind of come together with any ideas about that, then the more provocative question might be, should we actually have these organizations take over traditional business? Starting with the first issue, what is a social enterprise? I want to answer that question with two, what I see as sort of foundational examples, the Grameen Bank and Aravind Eye Care. And starting with the Grameen Bank, this is an organization almost 40 years ago now that was created out of dire necessity for some sort of solution. The person who created it, Dr. Muhammad Yunus, was an economics professor, a US-trained economics professor, teaching at Chittagong University in Bangladesh. At his lectern, pounding his fist on his table saying, "Free market economics, young Bangladeshis, that's the ticket to us having a future, prosperous future." And then every time he left the university and walked out off campus, he literally fell over and tripped over market failures. The very things that he was saying shouldn't happen with free market economics, he was tripping over market failures. And those market failures were in the form of hardworking, productive, but impoverished Bangladeshi women, almost all women, often with child at their side as they were working hard, very productively making things that were of great value and were being sold for great value, but they never got their share of it. They barely could eke out a living. And Muhammad, would go back again the next day and be teaching, free market economics. After a while, he got really, upset with the fact that he was seeing this problem everywhere. And so he spent a bit more time talking to these people that he was seeing in this difficult situation to understand their problem. What is the problem? Well, we work hard, yes, the goods that we make seem to be desirable and people are paying a lot for them, but we only get a little bit of that because the only way we can put together the materials, gather the materials to make these things is to get loans from the, we'll call it predatory lenders. They wouldn't use that term, but lenders that were basically taking all of the money that was being made from selling this on to probably to the Western world, and not giving much back, very much at all, back to these hardworking women. And so after a time trying to come to grips with how he could solve this, trying to get banks to help lend them money. The bank said, no way, we won't do that because they're poor people. They won't pay. They have no collateral to give us. Finally, one time he was in a village not far from Chittagong where there was about 40 people, all of them working in similar ways, small kind of handicraft business. And in talking to the people and understanding the specifics, he realized that for $27, the amount of money you might have in your wallet easily or on your phone and get maybe 2 submarine sandwiches for, if you're lucky, he could get the entire village out of hawk. He could get the entire village to be free of the predatory money lenders, and so he did. He basically gave them that money. Well, he didn't give them that money. He loaned them the money and said he wanted it back. And he wanted it back with interest. But he would make it possible for them to pay at, in their own time. And lo and behold, they all paid him back. And so he started to think, well, maybe we don't really need a system that requires collateral in any kind of hard capital sense, money or property. We could actually use trust, the trust of a community or community members to replace that collateral. And that's what he did. He started a system whereby loans would be given to small groups, usually 4 women, and they're almost always women because they're the people who are working hard. And if money was given to the men, who knows what would happen to it? But basically, small groups of women would get loans together. The group was responsible for each one of them making sure that they paid. And so he tried this in a small way and then tried it in a bigger way, and it grew and it grew, and to the point where it became a bank that's now owned by over 9 million borrowers who are also the owners of the bank and owners of their own businesses. And so it was a system that basically took just a unique business model or a twist on an existing business model, and mostly used the market that was failing and that none of the regular market practitioners could actually find a way to solve problems with. And he found a unique business model that ended up helping that many people. Not only did they get loans to help their businesses grow, but they became the owners of that bank. Anyone that's in the banking or lending business, that's a pretty impressive return, repayment rate, outstanding sort of repayment rate. And so, quite a remarkable example of a social enterprise overcoming market failures, overcoming great odds to do some social good, and still be run as a for-profit venture. It continues to grow because it actually makes a profit, and it pushes that profit back into helping more people. And it created a worldwide movement. There's now 16 Grameen Americas. This particular one helping 600,000 Latina entrepreneurs. If you look around the world, here in Kamloops, across BC, pretty much everywhere, you will see literally hundreds of thousands of microfinance. So the term became microfinance, giving small loans to people, not necessarily always in group, but basically this took over the world in terms of small financing. Just in case anyone's going to go out and try to act on this, be careful because not everything that says microfinance is a social enterprise with a primarily social good focus. But the point there for us to take away in terms of defining a social enterprise, an organization that clearly has a strong focus on a social or environmental mission, but uses the market, uses what we might think of as typical for-profit business approach to funding that, rather than a donation approach. The second example is an organization called Aravind Eye Care, started by an ophthalmologist who was retiring at the time, Dr. Venkat Swamy. All his life he was, he spent a lot of time, he's an ophthalmologist, a surgeon, he spent a lot of time doing cataract surgery because in India there's a much higher prevalence of that problem and of eye issues in general. And through all those years working, he did some charitable work for free to help people, but he always felt so bad that there were so many needlessly blind people that they simply couldn't help them all. He also really liked McDonald's. And he wasn't a burger fiend or a French fry fiend or didn't like their shakes. He really liked their system. Breaking down the process of making hamburgers and getting them to people, and their design of locations where they'd get huge throughput to make that system work. And he was always thinking that there's some way to marry these things. All of the people who were needlessly blind and a system that would allow many of them to be taken care of, but it needs to be paid for. It couldn't be dealt with on donations. And so basically what he designed is a system that trained young women to go out into the outer territories, identify people who had cataract surgery needs, brought them back to what became a teaching hospital. And in one side of this hospital, people that were not able to pay would be coming in and getting their treatment and would go through the operation and would come out the other side. And that would be for free. And people on this side who had money to pay for such an operation knew they could get every bit as good quality an operation as they would in the market, anywhere paid. They were coming in this side, slightly better accommodation, but not fancy, and they were getting the same operation by the same people and going out to a different waiting room. And for every person that came along this line and paid fair market price, the organization generated the cost, the variable cost of 2 operations that they could do for free. So for every one person that went this way and paid fair market price, not premium, 2 people could get it done for free. And so he developed this model that allowed him to deal with a kind of a twist on the traditional sort of non-profit and for-profit system, blending the 2 together, and for everyone that paid, 2 would be free. One of the issues, and so that required setting up a teaching hospital where you had enough very junior trainees and then people who were practicing doctors doing their initial sort of practice. It also required overcoming other sort of obstacles. For instance, at the time, they could get the cost down through their really good system, but the lenses cost $60, and they could only be bought in Switzerland or America. Now, Urban Eye Care system is one of the largest producers of those lenses, and they got the cost down below $5. So they built everything into their system in a way that would find efficiencies, the same kind of efficiencies that normal for-profit businesses would, and did a whole array of ophthalmic sort of products and services and research and development services, but all in a nonprofit organization that's funded through profit-related business operations like that. And so that would be another example of an organization now in kind of medical, you might think of it as more serious and complicated sort of procedures, where it could have been just a small nonprofit organization that couldn't help that many people because it couldn't get funding. It could have been a smaller for-profit, but by combining the 2 needs together, created an organization that could do that much good. So if we kind of bring the definition together, what is a social enterprise? We could say, a fairly standard definition would be an organization whose primary purpose is to produce some sort of social environmental value, create some social good or environmental good, and which is economically self-sustaining, has some sort of commercial business model. And if we just parse that and pull it apart, we'd say, oh, that's a traditional nonprofit, a charity that we're accustomed to. And then this is a traditional for-profit. And so all it is an organization that we'd call a hybrid organization that does both of these things in one. But of course, this hybridity brings complexity. You're putting two things together. So as a social entrepreneur, some of you would know very well, it becomes very difficult. You're managing this social impact model, which typically has an institutional logic or a set of norms for how you think and how you act that fits into one world or one institutional logic. And then the commercial business side of that has another sort of institutional logic, we'd call it, a set of norms for thinking about and making decisions. And so that adds further complexity. One of the reasons we bring social enterprise into our classrooms, as well as caring about a better society and more sustainable world, is that for our students, let's say MBA students, many of whom are here this evening, when they're taking innovation entrepreneurship and they're getting their experiential learning, they have to create one of these rather than one of these, because if you can create a social enterprise which does both of these things and has that complexity, man, when you go out into the real world, if you want to create a commercial enterprise, that's simple. Right? And so every one of our MBAs that takes the innovation entrepreneurship gets the experience of creating a social enterprise. On the research side, some of the research I was doing back with colleagues in Ireland, we started to look at the difficulties of that and ways we could make that easier. And one of the things we did is start to develop a model that finds all the commonalities in the two different, because each one of these we can think of as a business model. Try to find all the commonalities of those business models, and then help social entrepreneurs to see how they can take advantage of the synergies, where they can bring the models together very tightly. Grameen Bank would be an example where they're almost seamless, the two models. The model that generates the money and the model that does the good are almost seamless. And so we looked at that as an example, and then other organizations, and start to build that. So that would be one example where our research is having direct impact in this area. And so we have a sense of a definition of what a social enterprise is. Hopefully we have some common understanding. Then the question is, well, can this organization type, this new organization type actually take over or do everything that a traditional business does? And if so, could it actually replace traditional businesses? I think the answer is yes, but we really will never know until we develop an ecosystem or an ecosystem to support social enterprises, just like traditional businesses have. And until we actually get to scale the sector to be big enough to see how does it actually function as a scaled up set of enterprises. Both of those are necessary for us to actually know, can they actually work? Certainly from a research standpoint, we need to know that. But as society, before we would be able to say, yes, we'd like to move in this direction, we'd probably want those things to happen. So the first thing is it scaling or has it scaled? Well, okay, first of all, some definitional. So we're talking about social enterprise as a relatively new thing. And we somewhat arbitrarily pick a date. 1990 is when things started to happen in this sphere we'll call modern social enterprise. We know that there were social entrepreneurs or people who were very entrepreneurial and fixing things in society long before that. Florence Nightingale, if anyone's from nursing and public health would know, and many others would just know her as a kind of founder of modern nursing. She was also an amazing social innovator, the things she did. I mean, the idea of going into a hospital in 1890, you'd rather just stab yourself before you went in. I mean, you might as well. It was such a horrible ordeal. And she made so many changes to the whole sort of experience of going to a hospital, as well as making nursing better. And so we recognize that there's many people who came before 1990, certainly. But something happened around this time when a whole bunch of organizations started to be created in the sort of shape that we saw Grameen Bank and Aravind Eye Care. So quite dramatically innovative mixing of market based ventures and social ventures. And so what we see there, if we take 1990 as the beginning, wow, Bangladesh went from essentially nothing to 150,000. India, more than 2 million social enterprises. Kenya, 40,000. And then all these developed countries, Japan, 205,000, France, 97,000, the UK, more than their population in many cases, more than their population number of enterprises. That seems pretty impressive. But overall, our best estimate, and the data still isn't very good, we don't get the kind of data you would through normal StatsCan, for instance, sort of data, but we have decent sort of estimates. There's maybe 11 million of these kind of enterprises existing in the world. And so, well, that might sound good or might sound bad. One of the ways to kind of get a sense of whether we're scaling or not is if we look at the normal progress of an innovation. And we take, this would be a standard curve showing how innovation gets kind of distributed or diffused in our society. With the darker blue being, these very early stage, easy to adapt or adopt innovators, and then those who would kind of follow them easily, and then the big majorities that you really need in order for an innovation to have a big impact. And then in that lighter blue line, you're just seeing how long does it take and what is the pattern to get everyone, essentially, to get 100% market share. And we know that any kind of innovations will start here, and they will have some sort of difficulty maybe somewhere in here. This is like a weather forecast. It's not that valuable, but my guesstimate is that we might be somewhere here right now with social enterprises, i.e. nowhere near scaled. And even if we were further along this curve, something that we need to understand is always a difficulty for any innovator. And the point when many commercial enterprises and social enterprises, but commercial enterprises, a standard thing is they start off and everyone gets very excited, they start to grow, and then they fall down this chasm of the difference between the early adopters and early innovative people who want something new and the rest of us, probably many of us, who think, well, I'm not going to do that until it's really proven, until it's really clear that I have a need for it. And so in that context, we're still a long ways away. So we can't say that social enterprise as a sector is scaled yet. The growth numbers are pretty impressive, but they're coming from tiny, tiny base. So then we can look at the organizations themselves and say, well, can we scale the organizations? Because that matters. When we look at things like cooperatives, which is also an interesting type of organization, we know one of the issues with cooperatives, certainly worker cooperatives, is it's very difficult to scale them. Mondragon, for instance, for those that know about Spanish, quite famous organization, it's brilliant in so many ways. As soon as it started to scale up significantly, it had to hire people who don't get to be co-owners because they couldn't manage that, and then they'd have to let them go and whatnot. So it's a difficult organization type to scale. That's not putting down cooperatives at all, but that's one of the things we have to think about. If this type of organization could actually help us in the future, we must be able to scale these organizations. Well, first of all, both of the examples I've given already, Grameen Bank and Aravind Eye Care, quite obviously scaled quite dramatically. So we know that, some kind of direct evidence. But also this presents a research challenge. Because these organizations are more difficult, more complex, we've spent a lot of time. There's a lot of good research being done right now, and we're actually doing some of that research. We've started an innovation for social good research cluster in our school. Many of the research assistants are here today who work with us. Dr. Salvador Barragan is one of the leaders. Dr. Tolo Lope Oluwafemi is another leader of it, and Dr. Scott Rankin, and probably some others here that I'm going to forget, have come together and are doing a whole host of research. We've been working with roughly 20 different social enterprises in BC in all kinds of different ways. Sometimes we're inside them, looking at how they're actually managing. Other times we're just measuring their impact on society. And I'm looking to see if Peace is here. We did so much work for that. So we're actually measuring the outputs of them. And so we have a number of research studies that are working in this area. Some of those studies actually carry over from when I was in Ireland. I'm working with a group of amazing Irish researchers. We embedded a postdoc, someone who had finished their PhD, embedded that person inside an organization that was designed to help people with disabilities get full sort of inclusivity from business. They'd done so well in Ireland and done so well in Spain as their first little test, and they were ready to go and take over the world. And we had the opportunity to put someone inside that organization to literally sit and watch them and record everything that was going on, so we would understand how they might be having difficulties, like when do they fall or when do they fail and what's causing those things to happen. I'll talk a little bit more about that specific study in a minute. But that's the kind of research that we're doing here at the school right now in the ISG cluster. We also need to be able to scope. Organizations can grow, and that usually gives efficiency by scaling up, but you also need to be able to provide different types of services. And it's especially important in some cases that you can do it inside one organization. We saw that with Aravind Eye Care. The big issue for them was overcoming the issue of direct medical care, surgery, and the care related to surgery. Well, scoping would be, now you're going to do the R&D for lenses, making lenses, and you're going to make the lenses. So it's a very different business. It requires a different set of models, et cetera. And so the little bit we can get about whether this sector, if you talk about social enterprises, is scopable. We've seen some organizations do it, but just in Canada, and again, we don't have great data, but our early data, StatsCan is working with us now to try to tease out more information. The top 6 social enterprise sectors in Canada, STEM, so science, technology, engineering, and math, so very serious deep tech ventures are being created in a social enterprise context. ICT, information, communication technology, so high tech businesses there. Creative industries wouldn't be too surprising. Retail wouldn't be too surprising. Healthcare, we've talked about that, and then education. So those are just the top 6. Gives us a sense that this is a scopable sector or set of organizations as well. And then, of course, social enterprises can fail, just like traditional businesses. I started to talk about that study in Ireland. This organization, we embedded our postdoc, and she was doing amazing things, and we were getting amazing learning. And this organization went like this, and then like this, and disappeared before our eyes, and basically sort of came apart and closed shop, all while we were in there and witnessing everything. And so this led to a paper that's just partially accepted at one of the top journals right now. It takes a long time to get papers like this through. But really interesting learning. For one, relating to kind of deep understanding about innovation and how really serious disruptive innovation happens. We know entrepreneurs need to use this different kind of logic called effectual logic. You could think of it as creative thinking, but it's a whole different way of going about learning so that you can be innovative. And we know that it works very well, that most successful disruptive innovators use it. Without knowing it, they use it. And those that do learn it, when they start to use it, will also have much higher incidence of success or rate of success with disruptive innovation. But we also know that it's not very good when you get to the point where you want to scale something up. Because when you get to the point where you want to scale something up, what you have in front of you to work with is like an algorithm. You've already done all that messy learning work, and you now have something that works, maybe just for a small group of people, but it works. If you're scaling it up, it's mostly repeating that, maybe with some modifications. And what we found, our social entrepreneur, who was an incredible effectuator, incredible innovative mind, wouldn't stop effectuating in that process. And so as they were trying to scale up, they were also trying to disrupt, find new disruptions. And so that was by itself quite remarkable, and one of the reasons why this paper is soon to be accepted and published. But another thing is that we know from more grounded work is that effectual logic is actually more ethical. You might say, well, how can a certain kind of creative reasoning be more ethical? Everything to do with effectuation is looking outwards at who's out there, who has needs, who has resources to help with, and basically bringing people and thinking together to solve problems. And we kind of juxtapose that with causal reasoning, which is our more traditional way of reasoning, which says, I want to get there, this is my end goal, let's put all the things in place to get there. And what we know from initial sort of studies almost 20 years ago is that effectual logic is much more ethical because you end up helping people in the way that they want to be helped. So there's much more empathy involved in it automatically. And what this paper also added to that was a dimensionality that effectuation is only more ethical when it's used at the right time and in the right way. Because we had an organization that was helping people with disabilities in a significant way in 2 countries, not one very small, but the other quite large country. It was helping those people. And then because they wanted to scale it, it ended up imploding and didn't help anyone. And so that wouldn't be a very ethical outcome. And so a smaller but still significant contribution of that paper is the fact that, hey, effectuation is more ethical maybe, but let's make sure we keep it in context. We also, and as many of the MBAs who are here this evening will understand, we also need to teach that feeling of failure, but not failure as a person, but failure as someone who's attempting to do something really innovative and needs to learn that the failure of that one thing that you try, a prototype, let's say, is not a failure of you, it's actually a good thing. And it suggests if we are trying things like some of the more prescient companies that look for real innovation, you reward people on the number of failures they create if they're working in the innovation section. You reward them for the number of failures because you know that if they have the right skill set and they're finding lots of failures, they're always trying something new. And that's going to lead to a much greater % chance of having truly outstanding innovations. And so we build that into our teaching in the classroom as well. And of course, no organization can make us all ethical and make the right trusting decisions all the time. And so social enterprises can certainly be unethical or act unethically just as traditional for-profit businesses. Some people would probably be aware of We Charity scandal. I'm not saying anything specifically about We Charity, but it's certainly based on news reports would have had some very serious ethical issues. This is a research challenge as well because studying such organizations, as soon as we get inside them, well, it's very difficult to get inside an organization that has had that kind of issue. And so one of the things we've been doing is trying to pull enough data from secondary data to see if we can get a full picture of this organization. Salvador and several research assistants have really pulled a great deal of detail together. I'm not sure that we're ready to write for it exactly, but there could be a very interesting paper that will help us understand what things were going wrong in that organization because it was doing so much good as well. And I said also, so can they scale and can they act like traditional businesses? But then another thing is, well, even if they can, what helps are startups and all these amazing new ventures, some we might say good or bad, but Airbnb and Uber and all those sort of organizations. Almost every big startup, every big company that came from a startup in the last decade went through an accelerator. I would guess, you're all bright and you're all informed, but I would guess the vast majority of people don't know what an accelerator is. It's an organization type that just came into existence in 2006 and sort of took over Silicon Valley and then spread around the world rapidly, all for commercial enterprises. And now it's starting to move into social enterprises. But I raise that only because it was that ecosystem that helped to make so many of the amazing innovations that we see in the commercial sphere happen, and would be one example of that ecosystem. And so, well, and especially when we start with social enterprises, before we can think of all these nice supports, we have to kind of undo a problem that commercial enterprises don't face, and that actually traditional nonprofits don't face, which is the legal form that you're allowed to create a company under. It doesn't really work very well for social enterprises. If we think about what we talked about before, what a social enterprise is, it's a nonprofit organization on one sense, and so it should follow a nonprofit legal form. You can be incorporated, but it's not a corporation that has any shareholders. It's essentially owned by society. For-profit would have to have shareholders who are the rightful owners of that organization. As we start to bring these two organizations together, which is what we say a social enterprise, we find these things don't follow. We can bring the organization and the business model together, but these things don't follow. I learned that the hard way working or volunteering with Habitat for Humanity in Ontario many years ago, and was amazed to find the amount of trouble and expense that we had to go through convincing CRA that our restore, the two restores we had in that particular case, was a proper revenue-generating device for this charity. And we had to fight, we had to pay lawyers and whatever. CRA isn't bad, the system just wasn't set up for us. And I hear that from so many people that are involved in nonprofits. So what's happening in that area? Well, the UK took the lead almost 20 years ago, launched what's called a community interest company. So it takes the legal good things that you could have for both of those kind of organization types. They launched it in 2006. They now have over 26,000 ventures. Good, but we know there's something like 100,000 social enterprises, so it obviously hasn't fixed everyone's problem, but some reason to think it's good. US has two different organization legal forms. They are in different states, so it's a state legislative issue. Here in British Columbia, we were quite early by Canadian standards in creating community contribution companies. How many people have heard of a community contribution company? A couple social entrepreneurs. Most people haven't, and there's a good reason. Very few people have taken this up, and there seems to be problems with it. They've just now, 2 years ago, launched another version, which is a benefit company, which I believe might get more uptake and might be more helpful. This also is a research challenge to us. If there's any people from law school here interested, we're looking for people who want to help us research into why are these organization legal forms not helping as much as they could, and which ones are helping. And so then the other supports, I mentioned a few minutes ago about accelerators making such a big difference to the Ubers and the Airbnbs and those sort of organizations. Well, we now have accelerators for social enterprises. There aren't that many of them, but they're existing and they're growing. Purple would be one locally and based in Kelowna. Many of our social entrepreneurs have had interactions with them, and those interactions have helped them to scale up their business, to maybe solidify their current startup. We are working with Purple very closely for the last, probably 2.5 years, running studies right now focused specifically on what are those accelerators doing to help their social enterprise clients. So we're examining the accelerator, what they do, and then we're inside their clients, interviewing and examining their whole sort of structure to see how it impacts those organizations to grow. A big part of that is then also trying to determine how do we measure impact? Because a traditional for-profit, you'd say, well, if you're making more money, you're doing, that's a great outcome. But for a social enterprise, that's not why you exist. You need to make enough money to continue that operation, that social good development. But it's not about the money, it's about some sort of social impact. And so we're taking some of the standard social return on investment measures, and we're adding with, in collaboration with Purple, adding other sort of more practitioner elements and designing our own social impact measure. We have that at a early stage now as a sort of, you could say, a proposition, as a new approach to social impact, and we have a large grant application in to allow us to scale that up and measure it and spread it, hopefully, across all of Canada to social enterprises and to all of the accelerators. There are things called engaged philanthropy ventures, social venture partners. Vancouver would be one. It's an international organization, and it brings together people who have money to donate, but they don't have to be super rich, and have skill sets, the knowledge, skills, abilities to help organizations, fledgling social enterprises, to actually do better. And so this is an example of an organization type that's growing around the world. They have something like 65 operations around the world at my last count, and individually always working in local markets with local enterprises. Impact investing, many of you might be more familiar with this because it's affecting for-profit world, but there's a whole set of criteria and elements where organizations are using specifically social enterprise-focused investing criteria. And those organizations are very pleased with these new legal forms I was just talking about. Because if you're a traditional nonprofit charity, you can't invest in a charity. It's owned by society. It will always be owned society. You could never have ownership in it. Therefore, you could never take any assets out. Most of the new forms overcome that and allow you to put some money in and get some money out, usually with some caps on how much return you can get. And so Impact Assets is a large organization growing that has really specific focus on social enterprises for much of what they do. And then we can put these two together, the engaged philanthropy and the impact investing. Acumen is just like a huge global consulting company that operates specifically for social good and social innovation. Everything they do is focused on that. The people they hire are building careers coming out of MBA programs and MASIM programs and getting jobs as consultants in lots of different places in the world to go out and help these organizations. Another part of the ecosystem. And there's even a nascent, just starting, social enterprise stock exchange, IIX Singapore, which I have to say is not really a stock exchange at this point, but it certainly is bringing together investors, people who want to put money into social enterprise and the enterprises, and trying to develop an exchange. They're also doing a whole host of other educational and developmental issues. So a relatively new development, but with a lot of potential. And of course, if we could actually end up with stock exchanges for social enterprises, it would be a big boon for making sure that the right kind of money got put against the right sort of investments. And so that's a look at that overall sort of ecosystem to say, hey, there's a lot happening there. Much of it is new and we can't measure it exactly, but the ecosystem seems to be there. So far we can say, well, can we actually replace traditional nonprofits or for-profits? Our learning suggests that it's possible. It would suggest that it's possible directionally. Some of the hurdles have been overcome, the legal forms and more and more of an ecosystem for support, but we recognize still many hurdles to overcome. Importantly and excitingly for us as researchers is the fact that a lot of that requires research and development to help the sector and individual organizations to overcome. So basically it says continuing learning, which is what we're all about. And then what else? We come to the last question, should. So let's just say they can replace traditional for-profits, should they? Well, clearly more work needs to be done on this, but at this point I would say indications are that it could actually, that doing so could actually lead to improvements in organizational ethicality. Salvador and myself and Professor Karianopoulos from Laurier are working on a paper that deals with this exactly. and looks at first-order purposes and second-order purposes of organizations and how a social enterprise aligns that to reduce moral hazard and principal agent problems. And so some of that work has also been done by others, more from a theory standpoint. Social development for our communities, that's a huge challenge. Part of it is being developed by what we're doing right now with this social impact measurement, creating a more comprehensive measure that gets that social impact and return on investment. And so there's reason to expect some improvement there. And then sustainability for our environment really would fall under this as well, because we're measuring impact on environment and putting a dollar value to that just the same as we're doing for social enterprises. So that answer obviously is still kind of open for discussion, and so hopefully when we're done this session and we can stand around and have a chat, maybe we can discuss that part. Okay, so there's my story for why every business should become a social enterprise. Thank you.
So now we know why Dr. Martin received promotion to full professor at Thompson University. Fabulous talk. Lots of questions. But our approach to these lectures is to provide an opportunity for a response to be given by another esteemed colleague who is very familiar with the nature of the research and the scholarship that's been presented here. So for this evening, we've already heard reference to Salvador Barragan, who is going to join us at the front to provide a response to Dr. Martin's paper. Thank you.
Thank you, Gillian. Well, I'm honored to be here to publicly congratulate Bruce on your promotion and to share my journey with you. Before I try to answer the question. It's great to see colleagues here, students, family members of Bruce. And before I answer, or I try to provide an answer if every business should be a social enterprise, I'm going to go back in time. I remember when I saw Bruce doing his presentation, he was visiting for campus visit before being hired. That was 5 years ago. And I went to his talk. I saw his resume, etc., publications. And when he talked about social enterprises, I thought, this is a great, passionate researcher, very qualified. I would love that we hire him. Now, can I collaborate with him in this social enterprise? I don't know. I don't know what that is really. Now, today, as you heard from Bruce, I can say that he has spread this passion with us in the Galarly Business School and Economics. He has been foundational in creating this social cluster for innovation and social good. We started with 4 lines of research: the growth of social enterprises, training people to be social entrepreneurs, including marginalized populations, measuring the social impact of social enterprises, accelerators, as Bruce mentioned. Colleagues have been joining us, and now we have one colleague, Scott, leading caring, leadership, and human resource practice in social enterprises. And of course, Bruce had a more potential challenge that we have to research. In the cluster, we have applied and received internal grants. Last year, we applied to 3 inside development grants. Tolu got 1 of them. This year, we applied to 4 grants. And fingers crossed, we really need we require this money to answer all these questions for sure. Then I just want to say that Bruce has played a key role in starting our connections with Purple, with these 20 social enterprises. Many projects have generated. Many colleagues are leading some of these projects, and many students are doing theses, research projects, directed studies, and we have hired many wonderful research assistants. Then they are getting in contact with these organizations. They are learning to do research. They are learning to understand how a social enterprise is run. And we are trying to provide our findings back to society. Then I think that, as Sam was mentioning, that Bruce has done a great job in publishing in top journals. I think he's also bringing a lot of social and local impact to this community. In terms of teaching, I have witnessed many Saturdays, maybe I left my keys in the office on a Saturday. I came to pick it up, and Bruce is here. I have come in a Sunday just because I left my lunch kit or something, and Bruce is still working here. He provides an amazing amount of feedback to the students, but he expects a lot from the students. He exposed the students to present their proposals to a panel of experiential external panelists to provide that experiential learning. He has mentored many students involved in supervision, co-supervision of all these type of projects. For example, the We Charity project, training persons with disabilities to be social entrepreneurs. I see a few students here doing the project of housing or cooperative housing. And I think he has spread that passion to some of us to be involved in this. Yes, a lot of work. By the way, Bruce, I take this opportunity to tell you that working with you, with a professional, passionate academic like you, is very exciting and it's very exhausting at times. I always want to say that. But returning to your question, should every business be a social enterprise? Well, I could say that in our work with our colleagues at Galardi, I could answer that we are looking forward to untangling the role of the social enterprises play in bringing social innovations. But I think what Bruce is trying to say with this lecture is that he's inviting us to work cross-disciplinary. There is many opportunities to collaborate across faculties and schools here at TRU. So far, Bruce has involved people for supervision of students from faculties or schools such as social work, open learning, of course, business and economics, education. And I think there are possibilities for nursing, law, tourism, and others. Well, I just want to say that answering the question is a little bit difficult, and for me, I'm a bit biased to say if we should turn every organization into a social enterprise. But in the name of my colleagues, students, I want to congratulate you again, Bruce, for your exciting academic journey, and to express that I'm happy to continue working with you. Thank you.
So before we close for this evening and move on to the socializing and chatting about some of the provocative ideas that have been presented here this evening, I just wanted to acknowledge that this lecture series serves a very important purpose here at TRU. Recognizing people who've been promoted to full professor is important. And really, no one tells you when you finally defend your dissertation that that was the easy part. Now the work really begins, right? Entering academic life is a road not traveled by the faint of heart. Tenure and promotion standards loom ahead, requiring new course preps, teaching, marking, writing up research findings, collegial governance, revisions and resubmissions, repeat. Not enough hours in the day, but always too many papers left to mark and to mark. And then there's how we manage to care for others and volunteer in our communities. And that's just the tenure and promotion to associate. To arrive at the rank of full professor, the scholars we feature here in this lecture series, like Dr. Martin, are those who have achieved international recognition and prestige. Their research has made a difference to the lives of students and colleagues. The professoriate must lead towards how to make the world a better place. Thank you for joining us this evening, and enjoy some lovely food. Thank you.